7 words. That was all it took to erase 3 years of Zuri Abra's life. Yoon Hana leaned in so close that her pearl earring almost brushed Zuri's cheek, and she said it the way people say things they have rehearsed. "You are too dark for the client dinner." The office kept typing. Every single person heard it. Every single person kept typing. Zuri's fingers tightened around the folder that held her own presentation, the one with her name freshly deleted from the cover slide, and she felt her heartbeat climb into her throat and sit there like a stone. And here is the part nobody in that office knew. Not Hannah, smoothing her cream skirt like she had just done Zuri a favor. Not the 40 people suddenly fascinated by their keyboards. At the far end of the floor, past the glass meeting pods, stood a visitor no receptionist had dared to question. A man in a charcoal suit who had arrived without an appointment, given no name, and been too quietly terrifying to stop. He had come to see the firm that wanted his money before the firm knew it was being seen. That was how Kang Min-jae did everything. Quietly. First. And in the space of one overheard whisper, the most feared man in Seoul learned exactly what Hanol Partners was. He watched the woman in burgundy absorb a public execution without letting her spine bend even 1 degree. He watched her walk. And something behind those cold eyes, something that had been asleep for a very long time, opened. She passed within 4 feet of him and never saw him. That is what this day would become. A woman walking through the worst hours of her life, certain she was invisible, never once knowing that the most dangerous eyes in the country followed her the entire way. In 9 hours, she would be alone in a room with this man. In 9 hours, the firm that called her too dark to be seen would learn who had been watching. But Zuri knew none of it yet. Right now, all she knew was that she had a folder in her hands with someone else's name on her work, and a debt back home that would not let her quit. An hour before the whisper, the decision had already been made in the boardroom, the polite way, the paperwork way. Director Bae Sung-ho signed off on removing Zuri from the client dinner without once saying her name out loud, because men like Bae have learned that if you never say the thing, you never did the thing. Hannah had brought him the idea wrapped in the only language he could not refuse. The client is old money. The client is traditional. The account is worth 11 billion won. And Bae, who had a daughter Zuri's age, looked at the biggest deal of his career, felt his stomach turn exactly once, and signed anyway. They called her in at 4 o'clock. Zuri walked into that boardroom still believing this was the meeting where they confirmed her seat at the client dinner. Her dinner. Her deck. 92 slides she had built across 4 months of 18-hour days, a strategy so sharp that a client who had rejected 11 firms had finally agreed to meet the team behind it. She stood there with her folder and her hope, and Hannah smiled the small smile of a woman about to do something she had decided was necessary. Here is what makes a woman like Yoon Hannah dangerous. She did not think she was cruel. She thought she was practical. She explained it to Zuri as though she were doing her a kindness, protecting her from a room that would not receive her. The client comes from a certain world, she said. We have 1 evening to close 11 billion won. We cannot afford variables. And she believed every word. That is the thing nobody tells you about rooms like this one. The knife almost never knows it is a knife. Zuri looked past Hannah to Director Bae. One look. One chance for the man who had toasted her work at the December party, who had called her the future of this firm with soju warming his voice, to be the person he pretended to be. Bae studied his own hands like they belonged to someone else. And Zuri felt something in her chest close quietly, like a door in a house where nobody lives anymore. Then Hannah clicked the remote, and there it was. 92 slides of Zuri's mind with Zuri surgically removed from them. Her frameworks. Her numbers. Her 3 a.m. breakthroughs. And on the credit line, one name. Hannah would present it herself. Zuri stared at that screen and felt her pulse in her throat, and somewhere under the hurt, a colder question surfaced that would not leave her alone for the rest of the night. Why had a client nobody had ever met agreed to this dinner at all? Now run the whisper back, from the other side of the glass. This is what Kang Min-jae saw. He saw a firm scrub its finest mind off its finest work. He saw the manager deliver the sentence with a smile, and the office lower its 40 heads. He had walked into this building to answer one question before trusting Hanol Partners with his money. What are these people when they think no one important is watching? By 4:47 in the afternoon, he had his answer, and they had no idea they had already failed the only interview that mattered. Cha Ha-jun had worked for Min Jae for 9 years, long enough to read the temperature of that stillness from 30 feet away. He had seen his boss stand like that exactly twice before, and both times, something in Seoul had changed ownership within the week. Ha-jun followed his gaze through the glass, found the woman in burgundy standing alone in the walkway, and felt the hair on his arms rise for reasons he could not have explained to anyone. Min Jae said 3 words, so quietly the glass barely carried them. Find her name. Ha-jun did not ask which her. In 9 years, he had never once needed to ask. And here is the anti-hook that should be sitting in your chest right now. A man who could learn anything about anyone with one phone call wanted her name. Not the firm's audited financials. Not Director Bay's leverage points. Hers. Hold on to that, because what he does with that name before this night ends is not what you think. She walked back through all 40 of them with her head up. That walk cost her more than any of them will ever know. Her heart was hammering at 141 beats per minute, a number her smartwatch would later log, with genuinely insulting cheerfulness, as an excellent cardio session. She did not cry. She did not stumble. She gave them nothing. Because Zuri Abra had learned a long time ago that in rooms like this, composure is not politeness. Composure is armor. At her desk, she slid the folder into the drawer where she kept the photograph. The warehouse. Tall timber doors, her father's name hand-painted above them in letters he had climbed a ladder to finish himself, 30 years ago, in another country, in another life. That warehouse was why she could not throw her badge at Hannah's feet and walk out the glass doors like every cell in her body was begging her to. That warehouse was the whole reason she was here. The office drained toward evening. Somewhere across the city, a private dining room was being set with gold-rimmed porcelain for a dinner she had built and would never eat. Zuri sat in the emptying dark and told herself the same thing she had told herself for 3 years. Swallow it. 6 more months. 6 more months of this and the promotion money buys back the warehouse, and Papa's name goes back over that door where it belongs. She had no way of knowing the man holding that debt already knew her name. Zuri's badge was still in her hand when the elevator doors began to close on the worst day of her working life. And if your heart is already beating a little faster, that is exactly the kind of story this channel was built for. Hitting subscribe takes 1 second, and it tells us the effort we pour into bringing you premium stories like this one is landing. It is what lets us keep making them for you. Now hold that breath, because the doors just sealed, and Zuri Abra is finally, completely alone. 35 floors. That is what she allowed herself. The composure she had carried like a shield across that office floor cracked the second the doors sealed, and the sob she had been holding since 4 o'clock came up through her chest like something tearing. One hand over her mouth. Old habit. Cry quietly, always quietly, because girls like her had learned early that the world punishes loud pain twice as hard. 35 floors of falling apart. Not 1 floor more. Because behind her eyes, in that falling elevator, was the warehouse. The smell of rope and cocoa sacks and hot dust. Her father lifting her onto a crate so she could watch the trucks come in, telling her, "Little one, everything with our name on it, we keep proud." He built that business over 30 years. It took 18 months to gut it. A creditor none of them ever met, moving through lawyers, through paper, through silence, until the day the locks were changed and her father stood in the red dirt outside his own doors. From inside her blazer she drew out the thing she carried everywhere and showed no one. The foreclosure letter. The only physical trace the faceless creditor ever left behind. No company name. No signature. Just a black wax seal pressed with 2 mountain peaks, an emblem she had spent 5 years failing to trace. She kept it the way other people keep photographs of the dead. To remember. To promise. Look at that seal carefully. Burn it into your memory, because you are going to see it again tonight, somewhere that will stop your heart. By floor 3, the letter was back over her heart and the mask was back on her face. She looked at the woman in the bronze mirror and gave her the nod. The same nod, every hard day, 5 years running. We are not done. Not while that seal has no name and that sign has no owner. The doors opened on the lobby, and Zuri Abra stepped out looking like a woman who had never cried in her life. Her phone buzzed before she reached the doors. Zola. Of course Zola, who could smell a bad day through concrete. Zuri answered, and her best friend's voice came through hot enough to fry plantain. Say the word and I am coming to that office with my church shoes on. And for the first time in 6 hours, something almost like a laugh cracked through Zuri's chest. Then Zola went quiet, and said the truer thing, softly. One day somebody is going to see you, Zuri. All of you. And on that exact day, God help that office. Then the message landed, and it was from Hannah, because of course it was. Bring the final revised deck to Hanwell. Private room. 7 sharp. Leave before the guests arrive. Read that last line again. They had erased her from her own work, and now they wanted her to hand-deliver it to the scene of the erasure, then vanish like staff. Zuri stared at that screen for a long moment. 6 more months, she told herself. 6 more months. She typed one word back. Understood. And across the city, a black sedan slid through the rain toward Hanwell Restaurant, carrying a man who now knew her name, her file, and one thing more, a detail Ha-jun had surfaced in under an hour that had made Min-jae go very, very still in the back seat. What that detail was, you will learn when Zuri does. All you need to know right now is this. The client is arriving early. The room will not be empty. And the firm that told her to deliver and disappear has just made the single greatest miscalculation of its existence. Hanwell is the kind of restaurant that does not have a sign. If you need the address, you were never invited. Zuri stepped out of the rain into all that black stone and brushed gold, and the host materialized, took one look at the document case, and did the thing that made her jaw tighten. He pointed her away from the dining rooms, toward the back. The service corridor. Of course. Even the building had been briefed on what she was tonight. Across the city, in the back of the black sedan, Min-jae read her file for the 3rd time. Zuri Abra. 29. Author of the only investment strategy that had ever made him sit forward. And then the last page, the one Ha-jun had flagged, the one that had turned the air in the car to glass. Min-jae closed the dossier and looked out at the rain for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than Ha-jun had heard it in years. Change of plan. I go in early. Alone. So she walked the back corridor, past the service trolleys, under the bare bulbs, the route reserved for staff and deliveries and, apparently, for the woman whose mind had summoned every powerful person coming through the front. Her heels clicked on the concrete and every click said the same word. Invisible. 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 She squared her shoulders anyway. Fine. She would set the decks, straighten the chairs, and be gone in 10 minutes. That was the whole plan. Remember that. 10 minutes. The private room stopped her breath for a second. 8 places. Gold-rimmed porcelain. Every seat positioned around a conversation she had scripted down to the contingency questions. This dinner existed because of her. The client had refused 11 firms and said yes to one deck, and the deck was hers, and her seat at this table was a stack of printed copies in a black case. She exhaled slowly, stepped inside, and got to work, because the fastest way through humiliation is efficiency. She moved around the table laying a deck at each place, straightening each one to the table's edge, because if her name could not be in the room, her standards would be. 7 copies down. 1 to go. The head of the table. The client's seat. She stood over it a moment longer than she needed to, the last deck in her hands, and allowed herself exactly one forbidden thought. Whoever you are, you said yes to my mind. I hope you ask her a question she cannot answer. She set the final deck into its pool of light and stepped back. Done. 9 minutes. All that remained was to walk out the way she came, and this night would become one more scar she filed away for 6 months from now. Her hand was actually on the document case. Her body was actually turned toward the service door. And that is when she heard it. The front doors of the private room sliding open behind her, 40 minutes before any guest was due. Zuri turned around, and the man from nowhere was standing in the doorway. Tall. Charcoal suit. Rain on his shoulders. Utterly still. She did not recognize him, and why would she? No photograph of Kang Min-jae had existed anywhere in 15 years. But her body understood before her mind did. Her heart rate jumped to 112 and her smartwatch, mercifully, kept its opinion to itself this time. Some men enter a room. This one repriced it. Neither of them spoke first. He crossed into the room the way rain crosses a border, without asking, and Zuri did the math available to her. Early guest. Or someone's security. Either way, above her pay grade and outside her instructions. She gathered her case to leave, and his voice stopped her at the second step. Low. Unhurried. You set the table like the person who built what is on it. Zuri went still. In 3 years, no one at Hanul had ever looked at her and seen the architect. He picked up the client's copy like he owned it, which should have been her first clue, and turned to page 41. Not page 1. 41. The debt restructure. The one Section 11 firms had gotten wrong and one analyst had gotten right. Then he asked her a question about it. Not small talk. A real question, precise as a scalpel, the kind you can only ask if you have already read the thing twice and found the one load-bearing assumption underneath it. And Zuri, who had spent the entire day being erased, forgot to be invisible. The answer came out of her the same as it lived in her, fluent and fierce, hands moving, building the argument in the air between them. Because the assumption is not the collateral, it is the timeline, and if you shift the tranche here, the whole risk profile inverts. She talked for 4 unbroken minutes. He did not interrupt once. Powerful men always interrupt. She noticed that he did not, and filed it somewhere dangerous. Understand what was happening on the other side of that table. Kang Min-jae had spent 15 years being lied to beautifully by the smartest people money could frighten. Ministers rehearsed for him. Chaebol performed for him. And here was a woman who did not know his name, arguing with him about his own money, correcting him, mid-sentence, without apology. He had walked in to confirm a suspicion. He stood there instead memorizing the cadence of her voice, and somewhere beneath the charcoal wool, his pulse did something it had not done in years. It hurried. Show me, he said, and offered her his pen. A small thing. A pen passing between two strangers over an open page. Except her fingers brushed his taking it, 1/2 second of warm skin against cool, and the contact went through Zuri like a struck match, sudden and specific and absolutely unwelcome. She pulled the pen back a beat too fast. He noticed. He noticed everything. Neither of them said a word about it, which somehow said more. She drew the structure right there in the client's margin, and he leaned in over her shoulder to follow the pen, close enough that she caught cedar and rain off his coat, close enough that focusing on her own diagram became genuinely difficult work. There, she said, tapping the page. That is where 11 firms lost you. He was quiet a moment. Then, softly, almost to himself. 10. The 11th never got this far. Zuri laughed before she could stop herself, and the sound changed the whole room. Here is what Zuri could not know. The men who worked for Kang Min-jae ranked his moods by the temperature of his stillness, and not one of them, in 15 years, had ever seen what that private room saw. The corner of his mouth, lifting. Ha-jun would have walked into traffic. And Zuri just stood there, wiping her eyes, entirely unaware she had done the impossible, asking the question that was about to detonate the evening. So which one are you with? The firm, or the client's people? He held her question a long moment, and something in his face closed like a vault door gliding shut. I came early, he said at last, to see what a company is when it thinks no one important is watching. Which was an answer and was not an answer, and Zuri felt a cold thread pull through the warmth, the same instinct that had once whispered to her about a black wax seal. Before she could pull that thread, the corridor outside filled with voices. Creamsuit and Pearl's voices. Hannah. Panic did the math for her instantly. Hannah's instructions. Deliver and leave before the guests arrive. If she was found in this room, chatting with an early arrival, the story would be insubordination by breakfast. I was never here, she whispered, already moving for the service door, and please, do not mention me. And Kong Min-jae, the man ministers could not get a sentence out of, inclined his head once and made her, without her knowing it, the second promise of his evening. You were never here. The service door clicked shut on her heel exactly as the main doors opened wide, 2 seconds, maybe less, and Yoon Hana swept in ahead of Director Bae, both of them folding into deep bows before the stranger at the head of the table. Honored sir. We are so grateful. And Min-jae received their reverence with a face wiped clean of everything the last 30 minutes had put there. His eyes flicked once to the service door. Then he turned to the firm that had called her too dark to stand where he was standing, and he smiled at them. If you have ever seen a wolf smile, you already know how this dinner is going to go. She made it 10 steps down the service corridor before her phone lit up and yanked the leash. Do not leave the building. Wait in the back corridor in case the deck needs revisions. Stay out of sight. Zuri read it twice, and a laugh with no joy in it moved through her chest. So that was her role tonight. Close enough to fix her own work. Far enough to never be seen doing it. She leaned against the cold wall between 2 service trolleys and settled in to listen to her dinner happen without her, 1 door away. Inside, the theater began. Bae took the seat of honored humility. Hannah arranged herself nearest the client with her presentation smile calibrated to the millimeter. And behind Min-jae's right shoulder stood Ha-jun, who had entered without introduction and been too quietly terrifying to ask about, scanning the room the way he scanned every room, and stopping, for half a second, on the service door. He knew who stood behind it. He had watched her walk in from the car. Whatever his boss was doing tonight, Ha-jun had already understood one thing. It had 2 audiences. The first course arrived and Hannah rose with it, opening the deck she had not written to the strategy she had not built, and she was good, give her that. Smooth. Rehearsed. Every transition polished like a pearl. We identified, she said. We modeled. We concluded. 14 weeks in 4 minutes. Zuri, pressed to the crack of the service door with her arms folded tight, counted every single one, and her pulse ticked upward with each theft, 98, 104, 109. If you are still here, still holding on to see what Min-jae does next, let us know you made it this far. Drop the emoji that matches your mood right now, and tell us where in the world you are watching from and what time it is there. And if you are watching on your TV tonight, tap that like button so we know you are with us. Because on the other side of that door, the client just set down his chopsticks. And when Kong Min-jae stops eating, rooms change. The question, when it came, was almost gentle. Page 41, he said. Your restructure inverts my risk profile on the timeline, not the collateral. Walk me through why. And the temperature of the room dropped 10 degrees, because that was not a question from a man who had skimmed a deck over drinks. That was a scalpel. Hannah's smile held. Her page-turning hand did not. She flipped to 41 the tiniest beat too slowly, and Min-jae watched her find the page in her own presentation, and waited. She gave him the summary. Word for word, the paragraph printed on the page, delivered with the confidence of a woman reading aloud and calling it insight. Min-jae let her finish. Then, mildly, the follow-up. That is what it says. I asked why. Shift the tranche and show me where the inversion happens. And behind the service door, Zuri's breath caught, because she knew that question. He was asking Hannah to draw the diagram. The one that existed in exactly 2 places on this earth. In Zuri's head. And in his margin. Director Bae had survived 30 years of client dinners on one skill, reading which way the wind was about to break a room. And every instinct he owned was now screaming. He watched Hannah attempt the diagram with words, watched her build a sentence that circled the answer like a plane that cannot find the runway, and he did the arithmetic no one else at that table could do. The client knew this deck better than the person presenting it. Which meant the client had studied it. Which meant the client cared. Which meant the wrong analyst was behind a door and the firm's 11 billion won was presently on fire. The second course came and went. The third. And Min Jae ran the dinner like a long, exquisite interrogation dressed as hospitality, question after question, each one aimed precisely at a load-bearing wall of the strategy, each one answerable only by its author. Hannah bled credibility by the plate. And here is the anti-hook to hold between your teeth. He was not doing this to torture her. Torture was a side benefit. He was doing it to force one specific sentence out of this firm's mouth. Listen for it. It is coming. By the fourth course, Yoon Hannah stood at the edge of the exact cliff she had built that morning. One more unanswered question and 11 billion won walked out those bronze doors. And she knew, she had always known, precisely where the answers were kept. 20 feet away. Behind a service door. Wearing burgundy. Zuri heard the room go quiet, heard the chair legs whisper, heard the stiletto heels crossing the lacquered floor toward her, and stood up straight in the dark, because some part of her had known all evening that this door was going to open. Hannah slipped through the service door and pulled it nearly shut behind her, and the whisper she produced was a masterpiece of shamelessness. The client has technical questions. You will come in, you will support the presentation, you will let me lead, and you will not mention your involvement beyond analysis support. 12 hours ago, too dark for the dinner. Now, essential to it, provided she came in as furniture. Zuri looked at this woman for a long, level moment, and then she said the only thing power ever respects. No. Not loud. Not cruel. Just no, complete as a locked door. I was removed from this dinner by name, Zuri said quietly. Put me back in by name, in front of the client, or lose him. Hannah's face did something Zuri had never seen it do in 3 years. It searched. For leverage, for a threat, for a softer word for surrender, and found nothing on any shelf. Because the mathematics had inverted. For one evening, for the first time, the firm needed Zuri Abra more than Zuri Abra needed the firm. The door behind Hannah swung all the way open, and the man in the matte black suit filled it. He looked at neither of them, exactly, which was somehow worse than being stared at. My employer requests the presence of the analyst in the corridor, he said, in a tone that had clearly never once needed to ask twice. Hannah went white. Zuri went still. Neither woman moved for a full second, and Ha-jun added, with the ghost of something that might have been enjoyment, by name. He requests Miss Zuri Abra. By name. Her name, which appeared on no slide, no invitation, no seating chart, spoken aloud in that room by a man she had met as a stranger 40 minutes before the world arrived. And the truth came down on Zuri all at once, the way cold water does. The early guest. The questions only an owner would ask. The seat he had been standing beside. The pen. Her heart hit 147, and her smartwatch buzzed a gentle congratulations on reaching her cardio goal, and Zuri nearly laughed and nearly wept in the same breath. She had spent 40 minutes correcting the Korean Mafia boss about his own money. So she walked in. Through the front of the room this time, under the brass pendants, past the porcelain, past Director Bay's slack astonished face, and the most feared man in Seoul stood up. Understand what that means in that world. Kang Min-jae had not risen for a minister in a decade. He rose for the analyst the firm had hidden behind a door, and every person at that table saw him do it, and every person at that table understood, in their bones, that the entire evening had just been renamed. What followed was 20 minutes that Hanul partners will be retelling in whispers for a generation. Zuri took the deck, her deck, and answered every question he had spent the dinner planting, and then the questions underneath those, fluent, precise, occasionally correcting the client to his face while Hannah's pearls seemed to tighten visibly around her throat. And Min-jae asked, and listened, and never once looked at anyone else, and the 11 billion won crept quietly back from the ledge. Bay watched the woman he had signed away save his firm in real time, and had the decency, at least, to look like a man swallowing glass. And then, as the last course was cleared, Min-jae turned his head 2 centimeters and nodded once to Ha-jun, and Ha-jun reached into his jacket. Remember the sentence I told you to listen for? It never came from the firm. Min-jae had stopped waiting for it. Whatever was in that jacket, he had brought it into this building himself, prepared before he ever heard her laugh, before the pen, before the margin. Prepared, in fact, the moment Ha-Jun's search had surfaced that one detail in the car. The detail that made a man of ice go still. Ha-Jun crossed the room and set an envelope on the table in front of Zuri. Heavy cream paper. And on the flap, pressed into black wax, 2 mountain peaks. The room kept moving around her, Bay saying something grateful, Hannah saying something hollow, servers clearing porcelain, and all of it went to silence underwater, because Zuri Abra was staring at the seal she had spent 5 years hunting, the seal from the letter over her heart, the seal of the creditor who took her father's name off his own door. Sitting on a table. Delivered by the client's own hand. Her hand hovered over the wax and would not land. 5 years. 5 years of tracing shell companies to dead ends, of writing letters that came back unopened, of promising a mirror in a bronze elevator, we are not done. And the answer had been placed in front of her like a dessert course. Touch it, and the night became real. Her fingers shook above the twin peaks, and from the head of the table, a voice she had spent the evening learning said, quietly, open it when you are alone. She looked up from the seal to the man, and the whole evening reshuffled itself behind her eyes like a deck in a cheater's hands. He had not come early by chance. He had not asked for her name because of a whisper in an office. The dossier in the car. The stillness. Find her name. She understood none of it and all of it at once, and the question that came out of her was barely sound. You knew. Before tonight. You knew who I was. And Kong Min-jae, who had never owed anyone an answer in 15 years, looked at her like a man about to pay a debt. Nobody at that table breathed. Hannah and Bae watched their client and their analyst face each other across a corner of walnut like the only 2 people left in Seoul, and understood exactly nothing except that the dinner they had planned had ended an hour ago and something far larger had been running underneath it the entire time. Min-jae rose. Whatever answer he had decided she would not receive it sitting among these people. Miss Abra, he said. Walk with me. And Zuri, God bless her, said no to him too. The second no of her evening, to a far more dangerous door. She stepped back from the table, envelope crushed to her chest, and her voice came out low and shaking. I have spent 5 years looking for the person behind this seal. The person who watched my father stand in the dirt outside his own building. So before I walk anywhere with you, answer me one thing, here, in front of everyone. She swallowed, and the room disappeared, and there was only him. Is your name inside this envelope? Watch his face. The man who had run the entire evening like a conductor, who had dismantled a firm between courses without raising his voice, stood there holding her question, and for the first time all night, Kong Min-jae looked like a man who did not control what happened next. His jaw moved. The answer rose in him. Hannah leaned forward. Bae stopped breathing. Ha-Jun, at the wall, closed his eyes like a man who knows exactly what is in the envelope. And Min-jae opened his mouth. The lights died. All of them, the pendants, the lobby glow under the doors, the whole building, gone between one heartbeat and the next, and the room dropped into amber-edged black. Porcelain shattered somewhere. Hannah made a sound like a struck bird. And through the dark, Zuri heard 2 things at once that she would replay for the rest of her life. Ha-Jun's voice, flat and fast, saying a word in Korean she did not know but understood completely. And Min-jae's hand, closing around her wrist. Not grabbing. Shielding. In the blackness his grip was steady and terribly gentle, and he pulled her behind the shelter of his own body, between her and the doors, and Zuri felt his heartbeat through his hand where it circled her wrist, and it was not calm. The untouchable man's pulse was hammering. Then his voice at her ear, so low it was almost breath, and what he said was not about the power cut, and it was not about the firm, and it was not even an answer to her question. It was worse. He said, they found you faster than I thought they would. They found you. 3 words in the dark, and every certainty Zuri had walked in with turned to smoke. Not, they found us. They found you. The seal without a name, the father's debt, the client who knew her file before her face, the dinner that was never really about 11 billion won, all of it collapsing into one impossible shape she could not yet see whole, and her hand tightened around the envelope that held the answer as running footsteps filled the corridor outside, more than one pair, coming fast. And that is where we have to leave it. Right there. With her wrist in his hand and his name, maybe, inside that envelope, and the doors about to burst. If you cannot accept that this is where it stops, you are not alone, and there is only one way to change it. Flood the comments with part 2. The louder you demand it, the faster it arrives. Part 2 is already waiting for you.